Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast on Mute Now. We're at episode 6, season 5, and today I'm anchoring this show as the lone host. I'm Yolande, and I've got four fascinating guests with me today. We're going to be talking about privilege. Just to set a bit of context, as usual, we've got Natasha and Angela and Raquel as co-hosts. You've missed Raquel for the entire season, but you've missed Angela and Raquel today. Hi, ladies. I hope you're all doing well. Context again in terms of season 5. In October 2022, as if you haven't heard this enough, we had our Leveling Up Symposium and we featured a number of presenters from our community looking at a number of topics or issues, for want of a better word, ranging from Brexit, mental health, entrepreneurship. And as you know, as a group UKPivot, our remit is the empowerment of women. Today, within the context of empowerment and the barriers to empowerment, we are going to be talking about privilege. How does one's privilege impact their everyday life, whether that be in a positive way or a negative way? And I have to say, before I introduce our guest, alongside the symposium, we have also been running the Privilege Project. If you haven't seen that, you'll hear a bit more about that very soon. Ladies, gentlemen, whoever you're out there, our listening audience, with me today I've got Grace. We've got Professor James, who is a lecturer at the University of Ulster, and you'll hear more about, I can't speak, more about Prof very soon, as I like to call him. We've got Jade. Jade is a dancer. that is what I would share, but Jade will tell you more about herself. And we've got Mimi. Mimi is very, very, very much an advocate within our community, and you will hear a lot about Mimi in terms of her background, her origins, and the work she does here in Northern Ireland. Whew, mouthful. Guys, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, as I said, I'm going to throw you in the deep end to tell us who you are, what you do, whether that be community work or otherwise. And we're going to begin with Mimi.
I came to Northern Ireland in 2009 to seek protection from the political persecution in my home country. And in, in February, yes, I just arrived at the end of February, went to prison, out from prison, and claim asylum. And my asylum was not straightforward. And I was waiting for the decision for nearly 4 years. And it was a hard journey. Only 7 or 6 months from the system. And after that, I became destitute, for 2 years and a half and stayed at the hotel and just getting help from church, my pastor, friends, sweeping the floor at the coffee shop, just to survive.
Yeah.
And then granted refugee status in 2012, in November 2012, after 3 years and 8 months, something like that. And in 2015, I said that I have to further my education because I have low background and I have to do my master's degree. And applied at Queen to have a place at Queen to further my education to do my master's degree, my master in human rights law. But it was not accepted straight away. But I challenged the decisions until I got an offer, an unconditional
Great.
offer to further my education, and I was graduated and in 2018. And 2017, I got a job, the proper job, my first job. In 2019, just after a year and a half, they made me redundant. So the same way, because where I was working before, I was leading a group of refugee women. And that's where I started my job of helping refugee women, because I didn't want my fellow women to face the same hardship life that I had, And so when I left my job, the same month I started writing my my constitution for Bomoko, where I am now. Bomoko means togetherness from, this is my dialect, Lingala.
Great work, Mimi. Congrats, hats off to you. Great work.
Sorry,
And I hope
because
to see.
it's a long.
That's right. That's okay.
And with hard time, yes.
We've only got so much time on a podcast, so I hope to see Bomoko growing from strength to strength. So well done. Jade, if you can tell us a bit about yourself, the work that you do.
Yeah, so I'm born and bred in Belfast. I have a mixed heritage. So my grandfather immigrated to Northern Ireland from Ipoh, Malaysia in the 50s. He was sent to a boarding school here, and then he met my grandmother, who was local Belfast girl. And the idea was for him to go back to Malaysia, because that was very common then, to send your child away to get their education in the UK somewhere, and then come home and live like a king. But no, he met my grandmother. And actually at the time, it was, especially in the 50s here, it was very faux pas to marry outside your race. So my grandmother was actually sent to the United States to be with her father, to get away. Her mother sent her away from my grandfather to get her away from him. It's like, you're not marrying foreigner. But the funny story is, both her and her older sister, my granny married a Chinese Malay man, and her big sister married a Chinese man. both of them married outside their cultural background. And then I tend to have a bit of mixed background in that. So when my parents met each other at Queen's University, they were both studying medicine. At the time, it was kind of the troubles, like 80s, early 80s. And they both mixed it up things further. So my mum was brought up. My mum's mum was a Protestant background in Northern Ireland. But then she met a man who was from South Armagh, my father, who was from Catholic background, farming background, and and then when they started to get married in the 80s, there were some churches that would not refuse to marry them, because they were marrying outside of their community. So growing up, I never thought about all this really. That was just who I was. I had these different relatives from different backgrounds and so on, but that was just part of my life journey, and I always saw it as a privilege to. Talking about privilege, I always thought that was a good thing in Northern Ireland, because I wasn't scared of one community or the other, because I had family from both, and I had family from further afield than Northern Ireland, so I wasn't scared of people that didn't completely white or whatever. So I just always saw that as an advantage, actually. But my current role what I do for a living is I'm a dance teacher, and I teach in different schools across Northern Ireland, dancing, and I mainly focus on the fun of dancing, and dancing being just something primitive that I think we all enjoy, and to enjoy that self-expression side of it, rather than having to be technically perfect. So the enjoyment of it, and that's why I created the way I teach. I get children to make up their own dances, as well as I teach some of the dance, they make up some of the dance. So
I love that.
So I really enjoy
Fantastic.
my work. Yeah, at the moment. Yeah.
Well done. And is it Gem Dancing?
Jam Dance is my brand name. So, but I mainly work in schools. So, and I really enjoy. I've had many different jobs. I won't bore you in the past.
I'm just curious. Any particular reason why Gem?
My initials, Jade McKee. Yeah, they're just my initials, and they make a cute word. So yeah.
Thought there must have been something else, but again, congrats to you, Jade. And again, I hope that Gem Dancing grows from strength to strength, and we can see you wearing your dancing gear.
I came straight from teaching to today, so I know. I feel very unprofessional compared to everyone else, but this is my profession, so yeah.
We're glad to have you.
Yeah.
Professor James, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I am James Uhomoibhi, originally from Nigeria. I first of all went to Rome and studied philosophy, got my degree in philosophy. Graduated from Nigeria with my primary degrees in physics and education. Then proceeded to Rome, where I studied and got a degree in philosophy. But then decided to come and complete my physics, because when I was studying my philosophy, I discovered that philosophy was too wide a subject, and I needed to finish a line of study. So I came to Queen's Belfast, the best in physics, for my physics degree, and finished my PhD in laser physics. And I was retained in Queen's as a lecturer. until I moved to Ulster University. But while I was in Queens, I never divorced myself from my community. I was one of those who founded the African Cultural Center, and also was the first first Black person to be the chair of the Multicultural Resource Center. And we did a lot of things. I was also one of the first group of people to fight for the introduction of the race relations legislation here in Northern Ireland. And where I founded, with myself, Patrick Hugh, and the others, we founded the old NICE, the Northern Ireland Council for Ethnic Minority. And a lot of things stem from there. I've always felt drawn to community service. But then, one of the reasons why I actually moved to Ulster was because Ulster is a futuristic university. Okay, it's a university that thinks well ahead of itself, and it's a university whose 2 feet are grounded in society. It's a civic university, and they're very, very pragmatic, quite practical in seeking solutions to extant problems, in society.
You're gonna have a job a very long time at Ulster.
No, well, they
After today.
exactly. Yeah, they at that time they created a virtual campus, and when I was applying to them, I did ask a question, and that was the defining question. My question was, how will you allow me to contribute to education development in my continent called Africa if I was to be a lecturer here at Ulster University? And the really, positive response I got from the panel was so good. Then I said, I'm coming here. So I stayed. I've been in Ulster, and while I've been there, I think I'm the current African Laser Center representative in Europe. I am also a visiting professor to 3 universities in Nigeria, a visiting professor to the Open University of Tanzania, and also at Maseno University in Kenya, and with links to CIBIT, the Catholic Institute of Business Technology in Ghana as well.
Okay. Again.
And currently at Ulster, I am the chair of the Black, Asian, and Minority Ethnic Network.
Again, Professor James, I mean, we would probably need an entire podcast to talk about the work of each person here. So again, great work. Guys, please bear with us. You know, these are powerhouses I'm working with here today. So Grace, no slight to you. Grace is a lovely lady. And Grace, please tell us about yourself.
Well, this is like going from the sublime to the ridiculous. I am absolutely ordinary. My background is my parents were missionaries in India, hence I was born in India. And
I told you.
and being born in India is very much part of my identity. It's a huge part of my identity. I came back to Northern Ireland when I was 7 because my mother took seriously ill, and we couldn't return to India due to her health. So then I graduated from Stromulus University College. So I taught primary school for over 30 years. I was passionate about my teaching. I loved my students. I loved my job. They were much more like my family to me in many ways.
And Grace still has that motherly instinct. still.
So, yes, in fact, I always said, quite literally, whenever I went to that school, I always said, I'm not going to go on the career ladder. I'm not interested in climbing the career because my heart is with the families and with the children. And either they will actually pull the school down, or they will carry me out in a box.
You're still here.
The school was pulled down, and that was it. But literally, it was a passion, it was a joy, and I absolutely adored it. And since then, I took an early retirement at that stage, and I have been a full-time wife, mum, grandma, and all the rest of it. And I love people. I adore people. I love community things, which is really why I absolutely love what you guys are doing. It's absolutely fabulous.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you. And this is perhaps the way that we're going to begin the conversation about privilege and the involvement in the Privilege Project, which I told you at the start that I'm going to tell you a bit about. So UKPivot has been funded, quote unquote, to test the privilege phenomenon within the context of Northern Ireland. We've been running a series of promotional videos and material on various social media platforms. If you haven't seen those, well, listen, get to it. And those would have led up to the launch of the documentary that we filmed, which was inspired by the Harvard University's documentary, which they titled Privilege Walk, and which we have titled similarly, but with the caveat that it's in the context of Northern Ireland. So the Privilege Walk, as I said, sort of made an effort to see privilege at work. And what I mean by that is simply to see how people, the participants in the project, based on the methodology we use, asking a series of questions where people had to take a step forward or a step backward, depending on the answer, to see how privilege impacts people's life, whether you end up in the front or at the back of the line. And that really is what it was all about. So the documentary is out there. You have got to watch it. Please feel free to send us your comments, make any suggestions. It's a conversation, and we hope that you become part of the conversation, part of the dialogue. So we go back to our guests, and I want to just really zero in on a couple of things. And just to talk about the project, and with that in mind, Grace, I just want to ask you, do you think that the project, looking back, perhaps where you ended up at the front of the line, for those of you who might have seen it or might have your own perceptions, you ended up at the front of the line. Do you think that the outcome or that outcome would have been different if it wasn't in Northern Ireland?
I think Northern Ireland is a very unique place, without a question. It's a beautiful place. It's a wonderful place. And I was very conscious from the very outset that I am very privileged. I'm very grateful for it. And I've always been very conscious that many others have not experienced the privilege that I have experienced. So I think it was good to do it in Northern Ireland. We had to do it in a Northern Ireland context because Northern Ireland is so totally unique. I'm not sure if that even answers your question.
Yeah, but I suppose maybe just, to just kind of think of it, maybe some people out there might be saying, yeah, sure, you'll still end up at the front of the line, even if you were in America or if this documentary was in Toronto or somewhere else because you're white. There might be people who might have had that. So I didn't want to take that for granted. I just wanted to know if in your mind you felt that it would have still been the same way, even if you were placed outside of Northern Ireland. Well, I suppose apart from India, because I don't know. I don't know what the outcome would have been. And I'm just throwing the question out, guys. So, in terms of it being in Northern Ireland, does anybody think that, Jade, you were part of the privilege walk?
Yeah, I was. Well, obviously, the idea of being an ethnic minority in Northern Ireland is being something other than white. So obviously, if you made the documentary somewhere where the majority of ethnicity is not white, then the whole thing flips in its head, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, yeah, if it was somewhere where it was but that's not necessarily a Northern Irish thing. I suppose the majority of people still in the whole United Kingdom and Ireland are white, but, that's just the nature of it. So Northern Ireland... Yeah, I don't know what lens. It is a very specific place. I think it was a really useful exercise, and I thought it would be really interesting because Northern Ireland is so divided. It would be a really interesting exercise to try to do in schools, like bringing schools together to do that walk. Because
let me just throw this in very quickly, Jade, and maybe I haven't articulated the question properly. So putting race aside, for example, and ethnicity, and how you would factor if you were outside of Northern Ireland versus Northern Ireland. Let's take a question, for example, that the audience might not have heard all of the questions, but let's take a question, for example, where it was asked, do you feel safe to go out alone at night? And if we look back at the documentary, for those who might have seen it, everybody stepped forward and answered yes. Yeah. But that might not have been the same if it wasn't in Northern Ireland. You didn't move at all. Yeah. And there were other questions that I thought,
Okay,
you know.
yeah, just to shed more light on that there. The fact that Grace remained in the front, I think it supports the view that irrespective of wherever, it is a simple issue about self-contentment. Self-contentment, which is what it's only your family and yourself that can give that to you. And for you to be self-content means and to realize that you are in a position of great privilege, which is where privilege really stems from here. So the fact that Grace all the time felt that's secured, and she's even said clearly, I was happy to be a teacher. I wasn't looking to be a politically person or an economic billionaire or a millionaire or something or God or any other thing. She was content, and that her background, her family provided her that privilege of upbringing. So irrespective of whatever you throw at Grace, wherever you throw Grace to, Grace is going to see herself as privileged.
That is possibly true. And it brings me back to the whole idea of perhaps cultural responses. So we're going to just pick out another couple of questions that the audience may not have seen in the documentary, because a lot of what would have filmed really can't all make a 15-minute documentary. So to go back to a couple of questions, Jade, I'm going to remember one or two. There was a question that asked if you had school meals back in the time when you were going to school, take one step forward. And many people take one step backward, sorry. And many people took a step backward, and that, in the context in which the question was asked, was seen as a disadvantage, not a privilege. Yeah. But there would have been other contexts. Yeah. That question would have been phrased differently, as in, if you had school meals, please take a step forward, because it would have been a privilege.
Yeah. So it's still a first world country. Some of those things come into it, maybe.
Yeah. So some of the questions, I suppose, and the responses were from a cultural context. Perhaps, I don't know if that resonated with any of you, but that resonated with perhaps me as an observer or one of the organizers.
Yeah.
So
I think also, like, there was a whole question about hate crime or hate speech.
Yes.
And when I took a step, I don't know if it really was, but yeah, like in Northern Ireland, that's quite common to get a slur for your whatever primary school you went to or whatever. That kind of thing is very commonplace here. Yeah. And it was nothing to do with race, it was purely to do with that divide, where it was very common to be called names or, have slurs during it, depending on your school uniform.
Sorry, Yolanda, the one that the question that you said, if you go out at night, are you going to blah, 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 step for Grace? She can step forward because it's her country,
Yes.
and she have a privilege, and she knows that where I can go, where I cannot go. But for us who just came over here with a lot of trouble, problems that we had back home, and the insecurity in our country, and it's so difficult. We have this mind, and we continue to work in this mind, in these thoughts that I felt that I cannot go out,
And it's not necessarily not Northern Ireland. That's a very good point. So it's really that fear, that struggle that you might have had based on persecution, and it's not necessarily. And so this is a type of conversation. One other thing that I just want to throw in quickly before we move it along was the question. I remember very clearly the question about if you feel comfortable going in public with your partner, take a step forward. And forgive me if I'm wrong. Everybody took a step forward. And I can tell you that I know that there were people on that line who had sexuality that was not heterosexual. And they didn't step forward simply because they actually felt comfortable to walk with a partner, but simply because it would be taboo to admit by stepping backward that people would be able to figure out that you are not straight, particularly if you're from an ethnic minority community. And the whole idea of sexuality that we still have, that is taboo when we're from ethnic minority communities. So a lot of the testing within that would have been context of Northern Ireland, cultural context, religious context. There was so much at play when we tried to do that piece of work. But guys, sorry, moving the questions along, I want to just ask you, after you've been involved in the project, what is your hope? Perhaps not just for the project, but what is your hope in terms of where do you hope this project takes the conversation, or just anything that you hope will come out of this project itself?
I think it's fabulous. I really do. I first came across it when Raquel came to our church and did an awareness raising event. And immediately I just thought, this is what we need in our culture in Northern Ireland. I hope that this is a springboard. I hope that this is really just a starter and a taster for what is to come. I hope that it will raise awareness to a lot of people who are quite comfortable in their bubble. I mean, a lot of people in Northern Ireland, we're really quite cozy and comfortable. At the moment, things are relatively peaceful. Things are relatively good. And but there are big issues out there that we need to open our eyes and ears to. So I would really hope that this is literally just the beginning of a springboard for a lot more of acceptability between us and respect between us, and actually welcoming other people to come to our land to enrich us, because you guys enrich us.
Yeah.
You really do. You bring so much to us.
I think, in addition to what Grace is just really touching on there, wow, I think you've actually mentioned it there. My hope will be for this project really to be a springboard from where we can bounce off to greater, to more enlightening projects. But, and it touches on one thing about community education. Community education is important in the sense that until, if you come from my culture, a child is not only raised within the family, a child is raised by the entire village. And so when I first learned of school meals here, it was something strange for me. Because children don't go hungry in my part of the world. If mommy hasn't cooked food and you are hungry, go to the next house. Maybe they are eating.
Yeah.
And whatever is going there, you sit down. You are served as a child of the house. And so that is the family. The family. And then also, community education need to be really developed, nurtured, and implemented at kindergarten level, primary level, secondary level education, further education level, and at universities. Universities as knowledge hubs should be doing research to come up with the best form of curriculum. Today in the world, we are talking about decolonizing the curriculum, because the curriculum we have is a cake. I've so far given about 3 keynote addresses at international conference looking at decolonizing the curriculum. The curriculum is so archaic that we begin to ask ourselves the question, are these curriculum really fit for purpose?
Yeah.
And such a project as this is a wonderful project looking at privilege. Is it privilege in the education sector? Is it privilege in the social sector? Is it privilege in the economic sector? Is it privilege in the political sector? We look at all of these here. So research outputs helps to inform this here. But this is your wonderful project that you have actually.
Professor, you forgot in the medical sector as well.
Yes, and the medical sector. So I think once people get to know of this project here, all these questions come to the fore, then everybody, their hands on deck, their hands on the plow. Let's get to work. Once you have community education there, parents, people in the street, people in politics, people everywhere realizes that the education of the child today it's not just the education of that individual child, it is actually education for the community and education for the nation.
Yeah, I suppose that, and I suppose what you know what I'm hearing is simply education is not just about mathematics, English, and those subjects. It is about education for life and social development and having social mobility. And really, this is what Professor James is trying to drive home. I have to say, I mean, I suppose the academic community is involved in some way because this project was nonetheless inspired by Harvard University, and perhaps it might be something that other universities, after we've started this, can take to another level, as Professor James has alluded to. I know I have been doing a bit of research and I've seen Warwick. Is it Warwick? Sure, Warwick. Warwick. See, thank you. University has been using this inspired project as well with their law students, and that they have been actually giving this privilege walk to every cohort of their law student that takes up the course, perhaps with the view of making sure that law students at the onset are able to articulate in their own minds what their own privileges are and to determine how they're going to use that privilege to interact with others, or how they're going to use that privilege in their career, their legal career, their journey. So maybe, you know, as Professor James says, this is perhaps something that we would hope the academic community can perhaps look at to do a bit more research on. And I have to say, maybe looking at the cohort we have here, perhaps there's a flaw in our methodology in terms of representation. Did we widely represent the Northern Ireland Society in the group that took part of the privilege walk? We don't know, because we have to work with the group of people that we have that are available. So, Jade, any hopes?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic project. It's a really good thing to weigh on. I think the idea of removing, just like owning your privilege, being aware of it and not having shame. I think sometimes people, if you feel more privileged, you're kind of in denial, or you feel bad because you have more privilege than somebody else, you know. And I think just the start of discussing it, acceptance, especially in the context of Northern Ireland, it's so divided. Like, I was a school teacher too at secondary level. For part of my life, I taught A-level moving image arts and photography, and the type of school I ended up teaching in Belfast was a world apart from the school I went to. It's so divided here by grammar, secondary, Protestant, Catholic. Yes. I went to an old girls' school. I ended up teaching an old boys' school. That was very eye-opening, and and I just think, talking about growing up in a bubble, I really relate to that, Grace, what you said. And I just realised what a very kind of bubble within Belfast I grew up. But like, it's not that bad. Yes, you might have called the old name and whatever, you were a divide, but yeah, socioeconomic factors, all those things. I think the grammar school, secondary school system does actually divide people into a sort of class thing in Northern Ireland a lot as well. And people feel very insecure for having not gone to maybe a grammar school, or people have very lack of understanding of, they don't understand people that didn't go to grammar school. You know, why did you not get straight A's? Sure, everyone got straight A's, or what, you know, like, like there's a big division. And I just think something like this would be really healthy to maybe bring different schools together and to talk about this. I don't know. Absolutely. But then also not to, because there's something I really was very poignant whenever I remember Macy was talking about, Macy was one of the girls who took part in the walk, and she was saying by ending up close to the back, she nearly felt a bit of shame. But how to handle that sensitively, where people who maybe, yes, do have less certain types of privilege, don't feel ashamed about that either. And how do you manage that?
And I have to throw you in the deep end, Jade, and say there's a lot of people out there watching that might be saying, but you're an ethnic minority person, but you seem to have been very privileged, and you have been very lucky. And I know we all have privilege in one form or the other, whether we want to admit it or not. And then, you know, there's also that demarcation between the ethnic minority person of color or the ethnic minority person who looks more European. So you have all that dynamics that would play out in all the different shapes and forms, which is so difficult to contain, and no matter where you go. So, you know, it really is going to be a start of a big conversation. We're hoping that this does. Mimi?
For me, I can say that Professor have already said it all, you know, and I will just take the hope that I can say for the project. My hope, I can take it in terms of community education. You know, if you can spread the word, you know, and to migrate like me, like us, for our children to know the privilege that they had to come over here.
And that's a beautiful way of looking at it, because you're actually saying something different, Mimi, that by coming here and being able as a migrant to come to the UK, it's a privilege.
Exactly.
That's a whole different
To set up an
conversation.
organization here is a privilege for me, because back home you need maybe to find the funding for yourself, you need to fund your project. But we had the privilege, to be funded, and to run the organization. That is something
So
that
it's
we cannot
opportunity.
and we cannot take it for granted, And our children, they have to work hard, Yes, of course, because they had an opportunity to come over here. Maybe the parents just flee for different issues, and the parents suffered, for them to come over here to set up here and their asylum process. All this thing was a big struggle for parents. And the children had an opportunity, and this is a privilege. And in terms of community education, please try to go until in the schools. Try, to educate our children in the community, educate our children. They have to work hard and to contribute in the society.
It's going to be a very sensitive way that we have to frame that conversation, because whilst we appreciate that having the opportunity to come here is a privilege for some, obviously we recognize that there's some that's going to say the suffering that took place for us to even come here, and the pushback in terms of immigration laws and different things, for some may not be seen as quote unquote a privilege. So we know it's going to be.
It's a privilege.
I know you feel that way, Mimi.
My journey,
I know.
Yolande, my asylum was not straightforward, and I suffered 4 years of torment.
I appreciate that.
Mopping the floor just to have something to eat, and it was so hard, so difficult to be a destitute woman. It was so difficult. But for me, I said that is a privilege, Today I have my status. It's a privilege because I got some rights that belong to me. They gave me this right to have a refugee status. It's a privilege I didn't have. It's an advantage. And I have to recognize it.
I appreciate that, and I commend you. And Professor James want to say something. That's why privilege conversation is such a complex conversation.
Yes, I think that it's a privilege for us to be sitting here. It's a privilege for us to have the life that we have, okay? It's a privilege for you to look at yourself and say, I am able to think of this, I'm able to think of that, and be able to take action on what you're doing. Now, all that I think we need for our existence exists within us. If and only if we begin to tap, first of all, we begin to be aware of our capabilities and our abilities. And then we begin to network. And this is where your project becomes really core, really important. And I think your project should not only be just screened like this. If there is a means for you to maybe seek further support, that it be rolled out to schools.
Grace, I'm coming to you because I know I'm going to have to bring it to an end, guys. It's a big conversation. I'm going to give everybody their final words very soon. And really, in your final words, I want you to think about perhaps how your privilege impact on how you interact with others. But final words is up to you. Grace, your word, final words as well.
Okay. Mimi, I would like to add to what you said, because, I love the fact that you see everything as a privilege. I think very sadly in our community, people see things as they're an entitlement. People think they have a right to everything. Education, it's a right. Everything is seen as a right and entitlement. Everything is a gift. Whether I'm white or whether I'm coloured is irrelevant. Education is a gift, and everything we have is a gift. So for me, from my community, I would love it that my community would see that education and so many other things that we have in life are gifts. So what you do in coming from other nations and actually voicing that so strongly and passionately, that's what I would hope that people from the white community would take on board and say, It is a gift. It's like, take the blinkers off, guys. Really and truly, you've just come up, things have been very easy, well, relatively easy for so many. Certainly education has been handed out so readily. It hasn't been a sacrifice. And therefore, I find it very sad that so many in our community, from the white community, do not appreciate the gift that so much of our lifestyle has been to us. We've taken so much for granted.
And I hear you, Grace. Appreciate it. I'm with you. But being the anchor, I know it's my responsibility that there are going to be those out there who are white, who were born here, who are going to be totally in disagreement with what you've said. But it is what it is. Feel free to share your views. I know some of you are going to say, I'm not privileged. I was born here. I don't have education. We know. But we are looking at privilege in its entire complexity. And we're happy to hear from you if you've got a point. Final words, Professor James?
Yeah, on my part, I think really privilege, we need to understand, we need to unpack privilege. Yes. If you see yourself as a privileged person and you realize that you love yourself and your sole responsibility in this life is to not only love yourself, but to love those that you come across every day. And that love, is a projection of, a gift to that person. And that gift could be alms given to the needy, or it could just be, hello, good morning. Yes, a smile. I recognize your presence. That is a big gift. And this is where community education comes in. So your project is powerful, privilege, and it reaches out to everybody, and it should be injected into the education stream so that it flows to all levels of it.
Thank you. We're going to run with that and possibly see where we can take this project. Jade?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking of the same thing, like how does your own privilege, impact how you interact with other people? And I think something, maybe just getting older, I maybe had some guilt of privilege I felt I had compared to others. And I maybe felt awkward around people maybe who I feel didn't have the same privileges as me. But now, the older I get, the more I just don't think about it. Because that's just all projection on somebody else, and you don't know what someone else has been given, and it's just like trying to not let those things treat anyone differently.
Yeah.
Because everyone can surprise you, and also, yeah, just like being aware of your own privilege, but not presuming anyone else's, and not feeling any guilt or shame or you're above or below anybody else because of certain things society tell you should make you better or worse than anybody else, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mimi?
Yes, privilege. For me, I can say that, first of all, I wish you all the success for this project.
Thank you. And I know Mimi is very passionate. She believes that she's been privileged. Bless her.
And privilege, I'm so happy to be here. It's a privilege. I'm so happy to study, to further my education here. It was a privilege. I'm so happy I set up an organization to help other people, other women, and to advocate for those who are voiceless, is a privilege. And I cannot take it for granted. And it's a privilege even to be invited in this podcast, to talk about the hope, about the work. It's a privilege. Not everybody or everyone that's got these opportunities, it's an advantage for me, those who maybe don't know me, they will know me through this podcast. It's a privilege, you can find privilege in different ways, to be here is a privilege, to be in this country is a privilege, to set up an organization helping other people is a privilege, using my skills, my talents, my competencies to help other people is a privilege.
Thank you, Mimi, and we appreciate you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate everybody here. I appreciate being in Northern Ireland. With that, it is perhaps the best note to say thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Guys out there, it's a big conversation. We probably haven't touched the surface, but it's a wrap. So, from all of us at Unmute Now, keep raising the volume on the whispered conversations in our communities. You can communicate with us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, on our website, UKPivot.com. It would all be coming up on the screen in the graphics. So see you next week. And from us, it is goodbye. So bye, guys.